The Final Fantasy VII Remake was a dream come true for many fans of the franchise, especially after having been teased with an impressive tech demo all the way back in 2005, featuring the opening cinematic of the original Final Fantasy VII revitalized on the PlayStation 3 hardware. It took Square Enix 15 long years to finally release a full game, and even then the game only dealt with a small portion of Final Fantasy VII's original story, subsequent releases being planned to fully flesh out the project. This means that we can probably look forward to more Final Fantasy VII for years to come. But even though some might say that there's no getting off this train, there are certain aspects of this first installment that have left some players unsure about whether they are actually on board with the new direction the series seems to be heading in. Hello everyone, I'm Nökkvi from Birds of Play, and welcome to Learning to Love. In this video, I want to offer you some hopefully powerful yet simple tools to help you make up your mind about the controversial ending to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Hopefully helping you to appreciate it a little bit more, and if you're already in love with it, then that's fine too. You can still join us for the ride. If you haven't played the ending yet, be aware that there will be spoilers, and that I recommend you simply pausing the video and spending the next 30 or so hours to beat the game before pressing play again. And with that out of the way, let's get started. While playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake, the game mostly stays true to the original game's story, aside from some additional content that either fleshes out the game world or pads out the runtime of the game, depending on how you want to look at it. One of the most notable deviations from the original, however, is the introduction of the so-called Whispers, ghost-like arbiters of fate, born of the planet to enforce the course of destiny. At first, they seem content to just swarm around the party menacingly, gradually getting more and more involved as the timeline of the original game gets compromised, ultimately taking center stage in the game's finale, throwing out all the stops to prevent Cloud and his party from altering the destiny outlined in the original Final Fantasy VII. As a new addition to the story, the Whispers, or Time Ghosts, are reminiscent of the Kingdom Hearts level plot shenanigans director Tetsuya Nomura has become famous for. As a plot device, however, the Whispers perform a more meta-narrative function, directly engaging with the expectations that fans of the original might have about the game and thwarting them. The final confrontation with the Whispers and their decisive defeat, communicating to the player that the future installments will not follow the same rulebook, at least not to a T. It is at this point that I would like to make an important distinction that might help us to better understand how we feel about the ending. The distinction is between the ending as an aesthetic element of the game on the one hand, and as a thematic element on the other. But what does this mean? Well, for starters, it means that we don't have to swallow the ending in a single bite that we might possibly choke on. Instead, we can break it down into smaller pieces, not only to understand it better, but also to help us sort out our feelings more efficiently. So, starting with the aesthetic component, these are all the things that have to do with how the ending looks on the surface, such as the design of the Whispers and even some of the acrobatics. Even though these aspects are seemingly superficial, meaning they could be replaced without affecting the plot too much, they are in no way inconsequential to our enjoyment of the game or even the game's meaning, because as we will see, there is actually significant overlap between the aesthetic and the thematic when it comes to the ending. The thematic component then references how what happens in the game affects the narrative of the game and conceptualizes it within a larger interpretive framework, not only hinting at what might happen in future installments, but also how we are to make sense of it all. The thing that struck me first about the ending was what I perceived to be an aesthetic tonal shift between it and the rest of the game. Suddenly you not only have these destiny ghosts flying around, but rather they merge into a design that seems fairly alien to the Whispers themselves and looks like it might have felt more at home in a Kingdom Hearts title. This design is then mirrored on a smaller scale in the design of the three Whispers that the party has to fight, that then merge again into what is frankly an insult to the institution of Bahamut within the Final Fantasy franchise. Another aesthetic divergence in the game can be seen in the adoption of Advent Children level acrobatics and everyone's newfound ability to be able to cleave huge chunks of debris into seemingly two equal halves. Now, if you're a fan of Advent Children, this might be exactly what you were waiting for. But if you prefer things to stay a little bit more grounded, then you might feel that you're out of luck. In general, this video is not about supplying fixes, but rather learning to appreciate what we actually got. But please humor me as I make one suggestion if you're having a hard time stomaching the aesthetic design of the so-called FFVIIR Harbinger. Try to think of the Harbinger as a weapon like Diamond Weapon or Ruby Weapon in the original Final Fantasy VII. The Whispers already seem to share a common origin with the weapons, both being born from the planet in order to serve some function. So it isn't too much of a stretch of the imagination to rebrand the FFVIIR Harbinger as FFVIIR Weapon, even if it's only in your mind and in order to more easily connect it with the already established lore of the game. But this brings us to the ending as a thematic element of the game, and this is where things really start to get interesting. I'm not here to explain the ending or to theorize about where things are heading, except to the extent that it might deepen our appreciation of the ending. Like I said before, at the thematic level, the Whispers are a plot device that play with the player's expectations, that have been cemented by the original game consistently being one of the best known and most beloved games in the world of video games ever since it was released back in 1997. This tension with the original game is quite literally manifested in direct combat, as it is alluded to that the Whispers the party ends up fighting are actually based off of themselves, possibly future incarnations of them. One fighting with a sword like Cloud, another one bare-handed like Tifa, and the last one with a gun like Barret, defeating the Whispers, ultimately signaling that all bets are off when it comes to how the story will unfold in later installments, which, unlike Cloud's iconic weapon, is a double-edged sword, meaning that mixing things up can understandably either endear or alienate fans. The way this is done also opens up a whole other can of worms, firstly by implying the existence of time and events as something fixed enough to make Destiny concretely malleable, the Whispers seemingly attuned to this flow, and secondly hinting at the existence of multiple timelines or the possibility to affect the past. Zack being seen surviving the ambush outside Midgar, that up to this point had canonically cost him his life. As of now, it's impossible to tell where this train is taking us, and since popular culture has in recent memory been let down by two other massive franchises, it's understandable that a lot of people are wary of these changes. All we can do is hope that the developers of Final Fantasy VII Remake stick the landing and deliver an experience that merit these drastic alterations to the plot of a game that's been such a large part of the video game landscape for so long. Faced with overcoming these hurdles, learning to love the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake requires us to be open to new experiences, even at the cost of losing out on an exact retelling of the original Final Fantasy VII with updated graphics and gameplay. Something that isn't a trivial matter to a lot of fans that had been waiting for a long time for such a game. This approach nevertheless revivifies the legacy of Final Fantasy VII in a way that a faithful retelling probably never could have. Not only getting the Final Fantasy community continuously talking about the game, but also leaving us at the edge of our seats, since later entries are just as likely to feature similarly bold choices, even altering the fate of some characters. The future is uncertain, and we are looking forward to the ride. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and Final Fantasy is your thing, then please consider subscribing to the channel. If you made it this far, then let us know down in the comments below how you feel about the Final Fantasy VII Remake ending. Let's get some bird sounds. I am superior to Sephiroth, because I have two wings.